I like running my own Ethereum nodes because I'm a dApp developer and I do a lot of blockchain development. So I don't like to rely on third-party services that make this available for me. And this is what I'll be talking about very briefly. So I'm Bruno and I'm affiliated with a bunch of these projects. You can follow me on Twitter to find out more if you're interested. So Inferior is great. Inferior is a company which provides Ethereum endpoints for everybody to use. So you can connect to their servers, query the blockchain that way. You don't have to run your own node. You can spin up a proof of concept dApp very quickly. The problem is that most of these dApps stay on Inferior indefinitely because they just never get around to switching to their own nodes. So what this means is that the next time Amazon Web Services fails, and it will, we're going to have a much bigger problem than a couple websites disappearing because everybody is running their nodes on AWS or on Inferior, which is also running on AWS in a big part. So if you're depending on someone else to provide you with the data to the blockchain, you are missing the point of the blockchain entirely, just like you're missing the point with private blockchains, with consortiums, with enterprise blockchains, and so on. So a public blockchain is meant to be accessible to everybody, and you can easily modify permissions and make sure that anyone who should be able to do something can do something. But this is not the way to do it. You know? You're using a proxy and you're trusting their information. While you can verify the information that you're getting because it's just an RPC node, so you're basically connecting to their node and not just asking for data and trusting it. You're connecting to their node and verifying the data. That node can disappear. And you definitely don't want the friction of your users staring blankly at your dApp and not being able to interact with it just because a central provider has crashed. Inferior is right now bleeding money really in huge amounts because they're basically providing the service for free. So they're an altruistic service and there's no telling how long they'll be live. So what I started experimenting with was the minimum viable possible configuration of hardware on which you can run your own full node. Now, it should be clarified that a full node does not have 2 terabytes as many people like to claim, and you don't need a powerful machine. And in terms of full nodes, so we have to make the distinction between a full node and an archive node. So a full node is a node which has all the information it needs to verify transactions on the blockchain, but it doesn't have historical data so that it can look up transactions in the past. That type of node is called an archive node, and that one does need 2 terabytes of data. But those nodes are used by very few services, by block explorers and so on, and the average dApp developer or even the hardcore project of today doesn't need an archive node. A full node is enough. And a full node is actually quite a bit smaller and less resource demanding. A full node does need an SSD because it reads and writes a lot. So you need a fast disk because if you're using a traditional disk, it's not going to be able to spin fast enough to cover all the states that are happening in the most recent blocks. And you can sync forever, it's never going to finish. So you need an SSD, that's the only caveat. Everything else is really minimizable. A full node in Geth is, in version 1.9, it's going to be like 130 gigabytes. And they're working on making that even smaller. Parity can handle it at, I think, 70 gigabytes. That's really nothing considering what you get. So what I have here, and you can check it out outside on the table, I have a few of those running. This is a Nano PC. It's a microcomputer with ARM architecture. It's got a dual core and a quad core processor and 4 gigs of RAM. It's a very cheap, very small device. And underneath it is an SSD disk plugged in, which is super fast. It's half a terabyte, so it's good for another 2 or 3 years on proof of work. And one of the bigger benefits of this is that once Ethereum goes proof of stake, and if you want to find out about Ethereum 2.0 and proof of stake, you can come to my talk later at 3 about Ethereum 2.0. You can just switch this over to proof of stake and you can run validators on this. So you can stake from this. The most appealing fact, the most appealing advantage of this is the fact that it consumes almost no electricity. So whereas you would run a typical PC like even this one, which is super weak, it has an Intel Celeron inside, it still needs 500 watts of power just to stay on. And it's super crappy. It can't run anything. Like it's like maybe 100 times weaker than your smartphone. This is much more powerful than this computer, and it spends 6 watts of power. So I have a setup outside on the table with 2 of these nodes, a router, a tablet that's monitoring the nodes, and the extension cord and everything, and it all combined takes 13 watts of power, which comes down to some $10 of electricity per year to run such a node, which is nothing. Considering this cost, you can basically imagine somebody plugging in a solar panel into this and it'll work, because you can get that much electricity from a solar panel. Also, the router that I'm using to power these is a SIM card powered data router. So I just plugged in a SIM card from a mobile phone provider, and I'm using that to sync the Ethereum full node. So I'm running Ethereum full nodes outside and serving them for people to connect to. So I'm not using it just for my dApps. I'm opening it up to the public, and people are connecting through it and using their dApps on my server without a hitch. It doesn't break, it doesn't go out of sync, anything. If you want to find out more about these devices, the exact hardware specs, if you want to buy them, I'm selling them at cost. So I bought the components, I put them together, and I'm selling them for the exact amount that I bought them for, just to help the network. But I actually recommend that you don't buy them from the store, because it just takes me a lot of time and money to put them together. You should check out the components. They're all written there on the site, and order them yourself. The total cost is around 250 dice, $250. You can get this device in pieces, and you can even minimize that by getting a smaller SSD, because you don't actually need the big one. I use 0.5 terabyte. You can get away with 256 gigabytes, and so on. So you can get away with like $250 for a device, and $10 per year to run it, and you basically bought yourself virtually lifelong access to the world computer, which is uncensorable and unstoppable. And I think that's really powerful, and much more powerful than Inferior, and depending on someone else to provide you with this service. That's it for me. Thank you. If there's any questions, I'll take them now.
What is the difference of your product compared to DAppNode? You know,
DAppNode is an installation package that goes onto hardware. So it's like a pre-installed image that goes, it's very similar in the software sense. DAppNode is now running on Avado devices, and Avado devices are similar to this, but they're selling them for a profit, and they're a little weaker because they're trying to cover the margin, but it's essentially the same thing.
DAppNode costs like $1,000.
Yes. So they have 3 levels of strength for the unit. So the most basic one has 256 gigabytes of space and can only cover one binary at a time. So you can only run Geth, for example, on it. On these devices, you can run Geth, Parity, Status, which is pre-installed, IPFS node, and so on and so forth at the same time without them choking up. So that's a big advantage here. However, they have support, and they have like a larger scale backing behind them. So they have nice custom-made boxes. They have a team that will respond to your questions and so on.
They're building the thing in China?
That too, yeah. So it's virtually the same thing. It's a little more expensive and a little weaker in processing power, but you get this customer support that you need from a commercial product, you know. I would say that mine will last longer, like at the cheapest tier. If you buy the cheapest tier, theirs might become outdated in a year or so, even sooner, depending on how the chain will grow. Well, mine will last much longer just because they have more space and more RAM. You know, that's it.
You should try to compete with them.
I don't feel like competing with them, because exporting hardware out of Europe is a nightmare, and I don't want to do it. So basically, I sell these only in Europe. I'll just put them in an envelope and send them to someone. But if I had to go through the hardware permissions and the declarations and stuff, I would never. Sorry?
They're based in Switzerland. The market for DAppNode is mostly.
Yeah, but they're gonna ship outside as well. So that's their commercial plan. I won't. I'm counting on people to open block and mortar stores on their own outside of Europe and do the same thing, because I want to see these nodes everywhere. Because basically you can plug this into a public outlet somewhere secretly, and it'll work.
Are you running a specific software do you need a specific software for running this machine?
No, it's basically an Ubuntu, like Armbian Ubuntu version with pre-installed, like all the images are pre-installed, so it's basically just plug and play. You buy it. I even sell pre-synced ones, because if you plug and play a naked one, it'll take like a week or maybe more to sync on Geth. And if you don't want to wait that long, I sell them pre-synced as well with cloned hard drives, so that you can just plug it in, and in a few hours it'll be ready to go.
Don't you think that maybe if you can customize some specific parts to make it powerful, it could be a solution for you to sell just on some specific parts to make the overall installation more powerful? Like
I don't know, probably, but
like
like I said, I'm not in it for the money here in this case. I have other stuff. This would take too much time and effort, so I'm just not interested. I mean, feel free. If I'll give you everything, the sources, the hardware,
I don't have this technical.
yeah.
Just for curiosity, what's your vision? Where the project is going?
I just want more Ethereum nodes running. That's it. That's all I want, because this actually helps decentralize the network. You know, you're validating transactions and you're forwarding transactions along to the network, and you're propagating the transactions and blocks across the network. So this is not a light client. This is a full node which actually helps the network. It doesn't mine, so it's not profitable, but it's extremely cheap to run. It helps. I mean, every development team that has ever built any kind of blockchain interface, DApp, anything, should run their own node, because they are at risk of being put out of business by Inferior just saying we're off.
So you're just evangelizing the right approach.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I just really want people to connect to something other than Inferior, you know, preferably their own nodes, because it really isn't demanding at all to run them. You know. People think you need like a data center or something. I don't know. Really, this is a pocket device that I took with me on the trip. I plugged it in and it's working. You know.
I missed the start, so maybe it was covered. How much bandwidth does a device like that?
So it depends on what you're doing with it and what binaries you're running. With a typical guess, just to run a full sync node, it'll take a couple hundred megabytes a week. I also run status on this, so that we have the relaying node for Whisper messages, and that takes a lot more bandwidth. IPFS also eats up a lot of bandwidth, so it depends on what you're running on it, but it's really like the average home connection is more than enough. Except when it's syncing, then you're not going to be able to do anything for a week. That's it. Okay, thank you.